Mama Brown. I got a dance that you must know. E-I-cha-cha-cha, to and fro. If I catch you rocking, you know what I will do. Ah! Cha-cha-cha, mama, dance with your papa. Knees up, Mama Brown.
Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Missing Episodes podcast. My name is Tim, and this time in episode 15 we will be covering the second story of season 4 and the final regular tale in the adventures of William Hartnell's Doctor, The 10th Planet. Now, before we meet the guests, an apology from me for the quality of my microphone throughout the recording, which is due to nothing other than technical incompetence from yours truly. By the way, the piece of music that preceded the signature tune is by Martin Slavin, and it's called Cha-Cha Mama Brown and was a hit in 1958. Martin Slavin went on to record a piece of music which made its first appearance in The 10th Planet. This time, our guests are, for the first time on the podcast, a content creator who makes a lot of cool sort of script-to-screen comparisons videos of black and white Doctor Who. It's David Gillespie-Pratt. Hello, David, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
And we also have, making a long-promised return to the podcast, a content creator, a fantastic fan of British vintage TV. Welcome back, Greg Bakun.
Tim, how are you doing?
I'm really well. Now, Greg, you appeared, it feels like 3 years ago on episode 2 of this podcast, The Reign of Terror. Yeah. And I think you said at the end of the recording when we were talking, you'd like to come back and do the 10th Planet. So here we are. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, David, first of all, tell us about your videos. You'll be able to explain them a lot better than I can, but I can tell you they're right in my wheelhouse. They're exactly the sort of content that we love to see on this podcast.
It is mainly started off looking at missing episodes, but on the missing episode soundtrack CDs, there are the camera scripts. And I can't remember what it was, but something came up and I thought, oh, I've got the camera scripts now, let's have a look. And then you start to notice all these bits of detail. And you go, that's not quite how it is on screen. Well, that's not. So the first one that really, because the first one I did was Marco Polo, where there's a typo in episode 7's camera script, which is quarter, it says quartet. Quarter. Yeah. So for years, when people reconstructed and talked about the end of episode 7 of Marco Polo, it ended with this mysterious quarter shot of the control panel. And then in an article, and it was also mentioned in an article years ago, but I was reminded of it, that it's like, no, it's actually a quartet, which is what the 4 regulars were referred to in the script. So actually it's a shot of the regulars at the control panel. But for years, and if you look in the reference books and early reconstructions, they all have this strange shot of the TARDIS console. So that's where it started. But I think the one that I got my teeth into was the 10th Planet, particularly the opening to episode 4, which we will probably come back onto later, because there's some interesting bits in that camera script that will be good to talk about.
Yeah, sure. I love your Doctor Who videos, but you know what my favourite video of yours is, don't you?
I think I do, because I think you're the only one who's ever watched it. Something I did back in my student days, which was just to do some random thing to the theme of Space 1999 involving a cheese sandwich. And I don't know how on earth you found that.
Is that on the channel still?
It's buried right at the bottom of the channel, because I thought, after you plugged it on the Master Plan podcast, it's like, because I had some of those older student-y day things on there. I thought, no, if I'm doing some more serious content, I have to get rid of those because some of those things were terrible. But that one stayed. That's the only one that survived the cut.
Well, what I'll do, I'm going to link to your excellent channel and recommend it highly, but I'm also going to link specifically to the video of a cheese and pickle sandwich being made to the Space 1999 theme tune. If that's okay. I think it's remarkable. But that's not to diminish your really on topic and brilliant script to screen observations. They are remarkable, and congratulations on knocking out such fine content. I'm really pleased that they're getting some traction. So hopefully we'll be able to send a few unfamiliar viewers your way. Greg, what have you been up to?
I have been, I had taken kind of a break for a while. I had been putting out videos on my YouTube channel. I used to, back in the day, do the From the Archive of British Television podcast. But, it's kind of like Tegan, when you get kind of bored of doing it, it's time to stop. And I stopped doing the podcast because I was just like, there's like 3 unreleased episodes and they're like really good. Like I have, this one based on Hancock's Half Hour, one based on Dad's Army.
Oh, wow.
Kevin McNally is in both of them, and as my guest. But I just like I can't find the desire to release them, so I moved over to video, and I started doing this video series called Doctor Who on BBC Video. Which was looking at all of the VHS releases one by one. I might be one of the only people in the US who has literally every iteration of PAL VHS for Doctor Who. It's one of those things back in the 90s, you're thinking, well, it's never going to be released again, so I don't have to worry about it. This will be my final copy. And of course now it's been like things have been released like 3 times, the soundtrack, the books, everything else. So that was fantastic. But part of it too for me for those videos is that there was so much fun and excitement around the VHS releases coming out that I don't think has been duplicated to quite the extent with the DVDs or Blu-rays. In my opinion, maybe they are. I'm just not paying as much attention. So I wanted to kind of revisit that and talk about the different excitements around the time and what DWM was saying at the time and what DWB was saying at the time. And I really find that it's a nice kind of historical way of looking at it. And I'm working on The Five Doctors and An Unearthly Child at the time of recording. So hopefully within the next month or so, I can release those. And we're working on a new episode of The Others podcast. So
The Others?
Yep, absolutely.
Gosh, tell the listeners about The Others. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, that's right. I didn't tell you about that. So I hadn't done a whole lot with that. The Others is a very fun podcast that is Bill Evenson, Robert Franks, and myself. And really what we do is we sit around, we drink wine, and we talk about a particular story that's playing in the background. It's not commentary, though. It's not really a commentary. It's talking about different stories, and it's not like MST3K. It's meant to be just a good celebration. Sometimes we'll point out the stuff that doesn't make sense or funny or whatever else, but we like to have some wine and talk about it. And then for a while we were doing our own missing episode roundup podcast because the Omni rumor was so big at the time. And our point with that was to kind of set people straight on what was going on, because there's so many people that just weren't getting it. So we wanted to kind of be as straightforward about it as possible. We're not touching missing episodes. That's your job. We're going to be looking at some other episodes and stuff, and getting the band back together.
Oh, that'd be great.
Some new stuff. Yeah, absolutely. It's really fun. It's a really nice way just to. It's like we're all sitting at the couch, all of us watching Doctor Who, basically.
Excellent. Your VHS videos, when I saw them coming, and thought, I genuinely thought, how on earth is this going to be enough content to fill a video? And you manage it so well. You talk so well about these videos. And I guess a strong thing for me, and I guess for you, is there's also a strong element of nostalgia, because very often they were the first ways that we enjoyed them. And
it's interesting because there is so, this isn't going to be like, Radio Free Scar or something. It's not going to have thousands and thousands of viewers. But I'll tell you, like the Tomb of the Cybermen video that we released, it's over 6,000 views on YouTube.
That's great.
For something as niche as can be.
Yeah.
I think some people like it. And Tim, that's the one thing I always get when people aren't sure about. They're like, how on earth can you talk about one VHS about the length of the story? You know, it's like basically my episode is almost as long as the story itself. And they're like, come on. But like with Silver Nemesis, which no one really, I don't think was as popular because no one likes McCoy still. We had on Eric Luskin, who did the American documentary, and we talked about that. So it's fun. It fills my bucket, so to speak.
Now, I've got a bone to pick with you. When we last spoke all those years ago on episode 2, The Reign of Terror, you confidently declared that you were ditching your VHSs and just retaining the covers in a folder. You haven't done that, have you?
No, of course not. No. I mean, and it might be too much information. My ex-wife's stuff was still here for the longest time. And so all my VHSs were kind of like packed away. And it's just like, what am I going to do with this? And finally, I moved her. She literally had a bookcase of Sweet Valley High novelizations, which is ridiculous. And I just like moved them, put them in a box, put them in a dumpster. And that's where I put my VHSs. And I'm just like, this is beautiful. I forgot about this. I'm going to sit in front of it and take pictures. And I literally did. And it's sad, but the videos are fun to do. And there's people like, oh, I love it. And they are just like, where do you find the room? And it's like, yeah, that's going to be a problem.
That's the issue. Count your lucky stars, they're not on like 16mm film.
That's next.
So we're talking about the 10th planet. So as a little warm-up, in the time-honoured fashion, I've been Twitter polling. And what I wanted to work out this time was when I was growing up and reading Peter Haining books and the like, the 10th planet, episode 4, was heralded as the most wanted return, the most critical missing episode. Now, not revealing my hand, but I didn't necessarily feel that was the prevalent mood. So I did a poll on Twitter. I'll get into the reasons why I feel the way I feel, but I'd be interested to know how you feel. So I did a poll, and it said the 10th planet, episode 4. When I was growing up, everyone said it was the find required. How do you feel about it now? We had 569 respondents, and the options were, it is an absolutely top-tier find, or it's a moderate find, or meh, we have the key bits. Now, I was really anticipating most people to align with my view that we've got the key bits and sod the rest. So if I've got a hypothetical choice between watching, I don't know, The Massacre episode 1 or 10th Planet episode 4, I'd line up behind The Massacre every time. The poll results were as follows. 17.9% were aligned with me. And meh, we have the key bits. 30.4% said it's a moderate find. And 51.7%, the majority said it's an absolutely top-tier find. So I'll ask for your thoughts on that in a minute and whether you agree. But I did another poll to follow up because my curiosity was piqued. And I said, is 10th Planet 4 possibly your most desired missing episode find per the zeitgeist in the 80s and 90s when I was getting into this stuff? And we had 400 odd respondents, and no was 77.7%. So yes, 1 in 5 felt that of the 97 missing episodes, that this was the key find. Now, I might have slightly revised my view as I've been getting ready for this podcast, but what do you guys make of that? Where do you sit on 10th Planet 4?
You see, I can't remember how I voted now. I think I'm either going to be somewhere between. It's not your middle vote or we've got the key bits. It's definitely not top tier.
Yeah.
But it was a little bit surprising because when I first came into missing episodes, that was the one everybody wanted.
Yeah.
But that was before it was commercially available. It was before the soundtrack was released. So there was this big myth around 10th Planet. And then I think, as happens, people start to see these stories and opinions get revised, things change, things go up and down polls. So I always got the impression that the more people saw more of missing episodes soundtracks, telesnaps and everything, they would be, oh, there's all these other episodes out there. So to see the fact that 10th Planet is still so desired by a lot of people and still so important, that was quite a surprise. I thought it would be a lot lower than that.
Interesting. Come on, Greg, tell us off.
Yep, I will. No. Here's the thing. I think that I fall kind of between the two. I do think it's a top tier episode to be returned. It is not my most desirable now to be returned, because I think the animation does a very good job of showing us what this episode would look like. I think for me, what is of importance to this, because is 10th Planet 4 better than the fourth part of the Massacre? Absolutely not. No, I mean, no one, I don't think anyone could possibly say that. No one could possibly say that 10th Planet 4 is better than the Destruction of Time. You know, obviously this is stuff that to be smart about, but I also think that 10th Planet 4 is historically relevant to the series.
Yeah.
And and even though we have the regeneration, we have a clip of it, I would really love to be able to have the bookend of having both the very first Hartnell story and the very last Hartnell story. I think that there's a great pivot with it. And that, to me, that just like checks a box. That being said, I think I'd much prefer something like Power 1 opposed to 10th Planet 4. But, I'm not even looking at it through the eyes of dramatic excellence. I guess I'm seeing it more through the eyes of something historically important for the history of Doctor Who.
And arguably for British TV as well.
I think so.
You know, the changing of a lead actor leading to a longevity which nobody could have possibly predicted, that 60 years on, well, 57 years on, we're still obsessing about this TV show. And I think with Doctor Who especially, because it's so vast, that's one of the appeals. And so naturally fans are interested in first appearances and last appearances. And, the demise of the first Doctor, even more so. And I think something else happens with polling, not that polling matters, it's a bit of fun, but when something gets animated and it gets an official BBC release and it sits on the shelf there, in inverted commas, complete, it loses some of that intangibleness, doesn't it? And like David said, this is all before anything was released. So we've had the audios, we've had recons, and now we've had the animation, which is a pretty good animation. It's a really good DVD set, actually, but we'll touch on that later on. So yeah, it was interesting. I guess my feeling more than anything, and especially since I've been doing this podcast, is I want to understand what missing episodes look like. And so I think I've got it pretty much in my mind's eye what the 10th Planet 4 episode looks like. That said, not really in my hand, but it's probably the best episode of the 4, but we'll get into that. So yeah, interesting and sort of heartening and nice in a nostalgic way to see that so many people are really interested in seeing it still, despite it being available in many forms. And we have telesnaps, and we have clips, and so on and so forth. And we have the clip, Yeah. How did you both encounter the 10th Planet for the first time then?
So over here in the U.S., as I was called prior to the recording, I'm a Yank. So I've been live in Minnesota, and we have the public television, public broadcasting system here, which is where Doctor Who is mainly seen in the 80s. So by the time I went to my very first Doctor Who convention in 1988, we had seen all the existing stories that were complete. So they would skip over, obviously, the orphan episodes. They would skip over even like the invasion, even though there's just 2 parts missing. Planet of the Daleks. They showed us Planet of the Daleks. They just removed the black and white episode 3. Same with Invasion of the Dinosaurs. They removed Invasion. So we had seen everything that existed, but so getting like the DWM and DWB, I've had this really desire. I think that the look of the Cybermen at the 10th Planet really interesting. I just really wanted to see it, and was very disappointed when PBS didn't show it, because at that point I wasn't really sure what existed and what did not exist. So we went from 1 week to the War Machines to the following week the Dominators. They're all shown in movie version. Just by chance, I went to this convention called Time Festival in St. Paul, Minnesota, and it was like They had John Pertwee there. They had Janet Fielding, Fraser Hines. It was our first big Doctor Who convention. They had a video room there. And I didn't know that you could get any of these episodes through the bootleg market. I didn't know that they were around. If we didn't see them on PBS, I just thought that they didn't exist at all. So I went to, that's what it was like at fandom in the 80s, when you don't have the magazines a whole lot or anything else. You don't have the internet. You're just kind of making it up yourself. You're filling in your own gaps of what the history of Doctor Who is. So I went into the video room one Sunday morning at this convention, because it's a 3-day convention, and it looked like something that I looked familiar through stills and stuff. And it was episode 3 of the 10th Planet, which meant I missed 1 and 2, which was a real bummer. I really wanted to see it. So I sat there and I watched it, and we got to the end, and it was really, really kind of bizarre, because, you walk in on and you don't know what's happening. Why is the Doctor in bed and Polly's trying to hide in the bed above him, the bunk bed above him, and all this stuff. And it goes into part 4. And that's where it really is strange, because this is the first time I ever ran across a reconstruction of any kind. And for all of us who see the loose cannon reconstruction or the joint venture reconstructions or whatever else, which are really pretty polished, this was one that was done by West Lodge Production, and that was in Australia. And it was a Perth Doctor Who fan club. And what they didn't have access to the soundtrack, which at that point were all crappy quality anyway. They got a hold of some script somewhere, and they recorded it themselves. And they were teenagers. So these teenagers, and once again, this is 1988. These teenagers, well, they sounded like teenagers to me. They were doing the entire script of the 4th episode. And at that point, remember, Marcus hasn't found the telesnaps yet. So we don't even know that telesnaps for 10th Planet 4 even existed in the BBC written archives. So they were taking stills from the first 3 episodes. And that's what kept me in there. So I could see some of the footage that was in the other 2 episodes that I did not see. Because no offense, if anybody from West Lodge Productions are listening, I get it. You're doing the best you can, but it's not good. And I do know that I somewhere here I have a copy of it. I'll try to send you something, Tim, just for your own, pain. I don't know. For your own punishment, if you feel like you need to punish yourself, maybe take a listen or whatever else. But that was really it. And, I was very big into tape trading. You see on Revenge of the Cybermen, the one that Ed Stradley did, the documentary about tape trading. We did it a lot in the US. That was really how I knew I was getting better contacts, was the quality of my 10th Planet recording. To the point that we got a really nice recording of it, where finally you could see the cellophane tape on their helmet. That was like a revolution to us, that we never seen that before. So it was showing that we were actually able to see it in decent quality, because it was horrible quality that we had up until that point.
David, how about you?
3 words: missing in action. Which, if you look for the uninitiated, in 1993, when BBC One were repeating Planet of the Daleks to pad the slot out from 25 minutes to half an hour, before each of the 6 episodes, they showed these short films.
Right. Yeah.
And ahead of episode 3, which was in black and white at the time, they showed this short called Missing in Action, which was all about missing episodes. And that was, I was a young fan, 10 years old. It was the first time I was even aware that Doctor Who had missing episodes. And a good chunk of that little short, they talk about 10th Planet. They talk about one of the hoaxes, which I think we're going to come back to later. But they built up this mythology around it. And then it would be...
So, sorry to interrupt. Was that the one with Ian Levine wanting to wring his neck?
That's the one.
Right, okay. I'm with you. I get quite confused about all those little documentaries from 92, 93. Right, I'm with you. Yeah.
That was the one. And they big 10th Planet up massively in it. And they have these dramatic shots of films being burned, and they have the episode numbers coming up, and it says, do not exist. And then 4 or 5 years later, when I was kind of getting back into Doctor Who, and this is the early days of the internet, we didn't have it at home. I had to go into my dad's office in the university where we could sit and I could get on the internet. And I somehow stumbled upon the Restoration Team website. And from there, it was like learning about War Machines, which had just come out. And then you start, it wasn't Googling, it was Yahoo. And you find all these different websites that talked about clips. There was a website that just had a list of all the clips from missing episodes, and it had the 8mm stuff. So you keep searching. And I ended up on the Reconstructions website, as it was at the time. And you scroll through and it's like, what are these? I had absolutely no idea. There was video covers for all of them. And it was like, well, I'm going to have to try and get one of these. And because of the myth around 10th Planet and everything, that had to be the first one I got. Because one, there was three surviving episodes that I'd never seen with it, and this myth had built up. And for the younger listeners, how you got these tapes was you had to email off to one of the dub sites. They would then send you back an address. You would then send them a jiffy bag, 2 jiffy bags. You put inside your blank video. You stuck it in the post with a self-addressed envelope and everything. You wait about 2 or 3 weeks, and then it will just turn up. And sometimes these tapes would be really good. Sometimes they would be shocking. And the 10th Planet, which was my first one, was actually a really good quality copy of the 3 surviving episodes. And then the Reconstruction was made up of clips from the surviving episodes. So it was the proper soundtrack dubbed over footage from episodes 1 to 3 with the cine clips put in place. And at the time, I loved it. I mean, it felt like a bit of a naughty pleasure, because it's like, I'm watching something that I shouldn't. Until I put that tape in, I thought, this can't be real. This can't actually be the 10th Planet on video. And at the time, I just lapped it up. I loved it. And that was when I got into Reconstructions and started just learning all about missing episodes. But yeah, 10th Planet had to be the first one.
I don't know when I first watched it, but I do know my first experience of it was on the Cybermen the Early Years video, which I didn't own. I borrowed it from someone, so it was always slightly exotic. And I think I borrowed it a couple of times. And on that, there were some clips of the original Cybermen. And I remember not knowing what to make of them at all. I didn't know quite what to think about their appearance, which was pretty cool, but I couldn't quite weigh it up. And their voices, I just didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know whether I liked it. I didn't know whether I thought it was good or bad. And then at some point between that and now, I've watched it 400 times. But yeah, it was an interesting experience. This is the second story of season 4. It's the first story recorded in the 4th production block. The Smugglers was recorded at the end of block 3. And the 10th Planet has various important firsts and lasts, which we'll just touch on. I'll just, in my introduction here, I'll just touch on them, and then obviously we'll pick them apart as we go through. It's the introduction of the Cybermen, who will return many times in the next 2 to 3 years. It's the end of the First Doctor's era, which is fairly significant. So just on the demise of the First Doctor, it's a key seminal moment for the show. It's arguably a seminal moment in British TV history. We're not going to get into that here. That's too much to digest in an episode about the 10th Planet, so we'll do something later on. It's the first Base Under Siege story, which we will see many, many more of in the years ahead. So let's talk about the background a little bit and how this came about. It's Kit Bedler's second story idea. He was interested in the idea of a space capsule losing power, which is quite Quatermassy, and the idea of a race of star monks coming from Earth's twin planet on a religious quest. Gerry Davis later claimed that the twin planet idea was his, and Malcolm Hulk had also suggested it before in a season 1 submission, The Hidden Planet. But Pedler was struggling with this, and Davis suggested that Pedler stops worrying about writing sci-fi and plays to his concerns over contemporary science. So Pedler comes up with the spare part surgery idea, taken to extremes, and wondered at what point a totally cybernetic man might lose his soul. Isn't that a great idea? That's scary stuff. However, Pedler plows on writing this, but he becomes seriously ill and requires surgery. So Gerry Davis ends up writing parts 3 and 4 and ends up co-owning the Cybermen. Now, the 10th Planet, evidently, was the first story of the Lloyd and Davis era where they felt it was completely their own vision, their own idea of what the show would become. Not that there was still a hangover from previous production teams on things like The Smugglers, but they felt that they were still trying to mimic what had gone before. But this was the new way Doctor Who would be. I think that's true to a point, isn't it? This is a first story. It's a first based on the Siege.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, even, and I know we'll get into this, but even from a production standpoint of the titles are no longer, I mean, what we call fonts now, you know, it starts with what we call Eurostyle, that it takes us through the Troughton era. You know, it's like, it's not completely different, but it's different enough if you pay attention.
Yeah, we'd seen a few changes, hadn't we? We'd seen new titles for the War Machines, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a new feel coming in with this year, and this is another step in that direction. So they were very happy with the story concept, but things obviously did not go according to plan because William Hartnell fell ill with bronchitis during episode 3 and was absent, which caused some script rewrites, and we'll discuss that. The director assigned to the 10th Planet was Derek Martinus. Now, really, it's Derek Martinus's first Doctor Who in a full-blooded way, in that he was brought in to do Galaxy 4 Missions to the Unknown, but that was a step in because Mervyn Pinfield was experiencing poor health. Martinus, of course, went on to direct The Evil of the Daleks and The Ice Warriors, and his tour de force probably Spearhead from Space. What do we think? Do you have any comments on the direction? I mean, it's quite difficult talking about Doctor Who direction. As Paul said once on the podcast, you're basically measuring people on a scale from Richard Martin perhaps managing some of the least competent technical executions in direction, and then you've got Douglas Camfield at the other end, and everyone else falls in between.
I think he does a good job. I think it might not be the best directed story of the era, but there's a lot of flair at times. I think one of the best bits we've got in the 3 episodes is the cliffhanger to episode 3, because the tension in that last 2 or 3 minutes is ramping up, and you've got the sound of the rocket motors building, you've got the countdown, and this is going back to, you know, the stuff I do with camera scripts, is in the camera script that last sequence is a series of cuts. But in the final episode, it's actually the camera does in a single shot, goes across all the characters, and then back in close in Cutler. And it's very different from how they originally envisioned it. And it's like, that works so much better. So you can see that even though they've clearly planned it to a particular way, they've gone, no, we can do this better. Another example from episode 3 of just how clever some of Martinus's direction is there is a scene in the rocket silo. So you've got Ben crawling through the ventilation shaft, and you have a shot, the camera is pointing at him looking through the grill. You then cut to a shot on his right-hand side, and he's waiting in the ventilation shaft. Cut back to the silo, the door opens, technicians go outside. And you kind of think, well, how did they get that shot of Michael Craze? Because he's in that shot. And I checked the camera script. That's not an insert. That's not a recording break. That was done as live. And it's like they've clearly got a bit of choreography with the camera going on. And they've actually got a break in the set where Michael Craze is basically in the set above this wall. And in fact, you can actually see, if you look in the ventilation shaft, you can see the gap.
Yeah.
And then there's a later shot with Barclay and Cutler outside. You can just see at the top of the frame where the top of the wall is. And it's a real shame, because when I was watching it the other day, I was like, how did they do that shot? And it's not an inserted, and it's one of those things with, as live television, how creative they had to be to get some of the shots that they did and do them in one seamless take. So I think the early episodes, I think episode 1 and stuff, it's a bit gets it done. But as the story's progressing, there's some more interesting direction creeping in. And we'll come back to this. I think I can't help but wonder what is in episode 4 that we might be missing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say Martinez, I think he's not far from Camfield, in my opinion, of his directing style. And I think that there's always, especially the stuff shot on film, there's always a look that when he's doing 2 shots and stuff, that it's almost, in some ways, and I mean this in a good way, almost too close, that really always says to me that's a Martinez shot. Also, something that he always does is somehow get something that looks like a crane shot or something into the story somewhere. Like Galaxy 4 is a great example of Enmaga's ship, and it starts, you start high and the camera goes low. There's at least one shot in 10th Planet when the camera's in the control room, and it's kind of moving from right to left, and it's above everybody because that set elevates in tiers, and the camera is kind of going over them to get to Barclay and stuff, and it's such a great, but not it's not overly noticeable because there's so much stuff happening during that scene that you just go with it. It's not standing out, but it's there and it's really good. And then to David's point, at the rocket, when Ben gets, pushed over at the end, you have a shot that's looking up. So you're giving the impression of great height. And I think that's very effective in the story. And of course, to, David's point, you have the cliffhanger to episode 3, but I also think the cliffhanger to episode 1 is probably one of my all-time favorites, just because it's just a question of what is this thing that
it's spooky, isn't it? It's amazing.
What is it? So I think it's a fantastic direction for him.
The second cliffhanger isn't bad either. The hundreds of spaceships.
Right.
I think there's three really good cliffhangers.
Yeah.
I'm going to share this is what observation that was on Twitter the other day, but I think we're talking about the episode 1 cliffhanger.
Yeah.
This is a good point to drop this in. So if you watch the reprise in episode 2, when the camera pans up and you see the Cyberman's face the first time, if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, the left and the top, you can see the edge of the backdrop. And it's actually really obvious. And again, this was the other day, and it's like, I never really had noticed it before, but that clip has been shown so many times. So it's like, is that in episode 1? So you dial back to episode 1 and going, it's not there. So it's like, is it framed differently? Is it just a remnant, something on the telerecording? And it's not there. So I put the 2 side by side. And although they look almost identical, they are different takes.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that phenomenal?
And what we couldn't work out, and nobody could really, is why that you would have 2 almost identical pieces of footage. Why they wouldn't just reuse the same one again. So that's something for if anybody can come up with a better theory, because anything that I came up with or thought, could it be that just didn't hold water? But it was just one of those tiny little observations. And the giveaway is when the Cyberman puts their hand on the dead soldier, the pattern of the snow is different.
But isn't it amazing that they capture the exact posture and position of the hand? It's a precise reenactment. I mean, the reenactment of the episode 2 cliffhanger, there's a different energy, as there often is. in the delivery of the guy reading the radar screen. And you can tell it's a reenactment because it just hasn't got that tension, and it feels like a rerun. But that episode 1 being a reenactment is so accomplished. I guess if there's a problem with me for the direction, Greg, you actually touched on it, is that the camera is close in a lot of the time. And so when you actually see photographs of the sets by Peter Kindred, who we'll talk about, and we'll talk about the design, you're missing so much because he's so close in all the time, and you don't get to see some of the excellent Snowcat base set, which is a slight issue for me. I think another distraction for me, and it's a real niggly complaint, but it takes me out of it nonetheless, is the real low grade of the stock footage that's in there. When they're showing the Gemini rocket, or there's a shot of all the radar dishes in action. That is really low grade 1950s, early 60s footage. And it's awful. And it's just such a shame that they did that, because you need a certain amount of suspension of disbelief when they're showing stock footage, when they're incorporating stock footage. And I'm quite happy to accept it. It doesn't bother me, but because it's such a different grade and grain and quality of film, that takes it out. So that's a shame for me. I'm not blaming anyone for that. It's just an observation. It gives it a B movie, sort of more of a B movie feel. So Peter Kindred, it's his first Doctor Who credit. It's his first of 2. He's obviously a bit of a base under siege specialist, because his second credit was Fury from the Deep. Like I said, photos of the sets look terrific. The outside snowscape set at Ealing is fierce. I love it. I love that there's very clearly buckets and buckets full of polystyrene or javelite being thrown in front of a fan, and you can see that stream of fierce Antarctic snow coming in. There's a story there, isn't there? In that Michael Craves had previously had a very serious issue with a blood vessel burst in his nose, and he'd recovered from that, but some of the polystyrene got up there. Now, the person throwing the polystyrene in front of the fan was production assistant Edwina Werner. Do you know how she comes into this?
They got married.
He asked her out, and they got married. Yeah, which is nice. So yeah, I really like the design on this. He didn't do the Cybermen, of course, but I do appreciate the design in this. I don't have any issues believing that it's where they are. I do think that the periscope bunk room is an underrated gem. I think it ranks for me in the same sort of realm as the security kitchen. Why they've got a periscope in the bunk room, I don't really know, but that's quite fun. I really like, and I didn't used to like the spaceship, the space rocket control room. It looks like, to me, I imagine those to be sort of red leather studded Chesterfield type seats, and that gives it a real Flash Gordon Saturday tea time serial type feel, which I really enjoy. Worth pointing out the spacesuits, isn't it? Because Earl Cameron is in Bosk's spacesuit from Star Wars, and they appear again in The Wheel in Space.
Yes.
Yeah.
During
they do.
Facebook siege,
Yeah. So I quite like the design. I think it's quite nice. I don't have any. I think I would have liked to see more of Peter Kindred, and I don't know whether he's still with us. But the interview he did on the DVD with on John Kelly's documentary is really fun. He seems like a really bright, intelligent, enthusiastic guy. So well done, Peter Kindred. I do need to raise something though in the design. I need to get it out of the way. I need to get it off my chest. I'm very forgiving of Doctor Who, and production design doesn't really matter to me. But I'm really sorry. The world's leading scientists can't agree on whether a model of the Earth upside down has any similarity to the planet Earth. Get new scientists. Honestly, I that really sticks in my craw. Do you know what I mean? It's a model designed by Shawcraft. It's made out of polystyrene, so obviously in episode 4 they can melt it or destroy it or whatever the effect is there. But there are a bunch of thickos looking at it. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it looks kind of familiar. Well, of course it does, you muppet. It's just an upside-down planet Earth. I've got that off my chest.
I love the fact that it could just be a reflection of the Earth. That's, they touted that as a possibility. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are we're surrounded by a giant mirror? Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think some of the science is a little dubious. I think Mondas turning into a supernova when the Z-bomb hits it is just a bit ludicrous.
And, you know, this is the first story written by the scientific expert. Yeah. I don't really know what to make of that or how to explain that away. Are they dumbing it down to such a point that they think it's for children and so don't need any sort of scientific rigor? But juxtaposed against that, you've got the sheer body horror of a race of people who have slowly replaced themselves with cybernetics, and you're meant to wonder if they still have a soul.
One bit I'll add, which is a piece of set which has the most amazing attention to detail, and it's on screen for about 3 seconds. It's the calendar for 1986, okay. December 1986. Now, they didn't. I mean, bear in mind, compared to how in Dark Invasion of Earth, the 2164 calendar is just the 2164 on a piece of paper. The calendar in episode 1, it is correct for December 1986. But, you know, on calendars, you have like the previous month kind of inset small.
Yeah.
They've got November 86 in there. And of course, you can just about make it out doing a screen grab. That's correct as well. So whoever made and designed that prop went to the effort of getting it absolutely correct for 1986.
Let's give it to Peter Kindred. Let's give it to him. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. One observation for me was the sheer amount of different stop music that's used. There's a really rich tapestry of stop music, various bits of sort of melodramatic music and stings and things. But we do have to point out that we have the first teasings of the appearance of Space Adventure parts 1 to 3 by Martin Slavin, which for me will forever be associated with Tomb of the Cybermen. And watching that on VHS when that came back in 92.
Yep, when it was released, yeah.
And it's kind of interesting knowing that piece of music so well, as we all must, that they don't really go for it. They hold off on the throttle on that piece of music, don't they? They keep teasing it in there, but it never really kicks off. So that's a really nice foreshadowing of the full-on space adventure music that we'll get later on.
And there would have been more music as well. Looking at the camera script, there are more listings for when stock music was to be used. So I think there was going to be something played over the opening to episode 1, and they just leave it with the rocket sound.
Mm.
So I think with they scaled it back. So there's a lot of it, but there was more planned.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's now have a run through some of the themes and the story here. There's some really interesting firsts and returns of ideas as well. So, mobile planets. Mondas appears as being piloted back towards the Earth, and that results in an alien invasion. Now, interestingly and sort of counterintuitively, this is only the second alien invasion since the show began. In 3 years, we had the Daleks in season 2, and that's it. Isn't that surprising? Because in future years, it'll happen every week.
Yeah.
My reflection on that is I love the Hartnell era, and I love that they're really trying to do something new every single story. And they have successfully avoided a really low-hanging fruit for 3 years by repeating it.
Especially when and I was thinking about this earlier, especially when, the budget for the series has never been great, that in the early years that it seems like that would have been something that could have been touched on more. And I guess Tim, I've never really thought about that either, that's only the second time. And I'm actually thankful for it. It's like, that is really pretty cool.
Yeah, indeed. So, David, over to you. Can you explain, please, why Mondas is being piloted back towards the Earth?
Is it being piloted? Because I thought the script suggested that it was just a natural thing. I think, isn't the piloting a retcon in Attack of the Cybermen?
I've no idea. So, David, over to you. Why is Mondas naturally drifting back toward Earth?
I haven't a clue. because that's what the script says. I think there's a reference. Do they say it's on an oblique orbit? So it's implied that it's journeyed away, and now this is just it returning,
Sure.
part of that natural process.
But they also have a plan, and that is that the energy on Mondas is failing. I'm fine with the plan to drain energy and for it to recharge itself by draining the Earth. I guess one of the sort of plotting issues, and I'll get back to this later perhaps, is that to me, if you're reading a John Wyndham or an H.G. Wells, the conclusion to the story was, well, we don't have to worry about it because thank goodness in the last 5 minutes of the story, Mondas has drained too much energy, whoops, it's blown up. That would be the resolution. But strangely in this idea is seeded halfway through.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it kind of takes the knees out of the large threat here, and that it becomes, interestingly, I guess, a matter of timing between can Cutler mess things up and explode his bomb unnecessarily because Mondas is going to blow up anyway, and that's a bit of a counterintuitive sort of plot turn for me, and I find that hard to wrestle with in the plotting. I think it's a good concept. I think it's a fine concept. Whether the planet is piloted or on its natural orbit, they're taking advantage of that anyway. But I find that hard to wrestle with.
I see where you're coming from. What I like about it, in a sense, this is like the first of like the Russell T Davies type of endings of Doctor Who, where you're presented with an impossible situation for a moment, and that's with the Cybermen coming back into the control room as the crew of Snowcap tries to get them out of the ship so Ben can go get to the Doctor and Polly, and they're all there, and they're like, well, what do we do? And then they all start to disintegrate. I think knowing that they were on a short amount of time, that they were playing for time, helps me with that more than them just like after the fact being like, oh, that's right, because that Mondas wasn't going to be able to survive. So I like the fact that there's a new motive for why the Cybermen were trying to get to Earth, and also that there was a lot of cunning on the Cybermen side. They weren't showing their hand with what they actually really wanted with the Earth. We find that out in episode 4. I do agree, though, it's kind of an odd thing because it doesn't really play like they're playing against time. It's just there that we know that time is running out, and it's kind of casual about it too.
But the plot twist is that the Cybermen in episode 4 are aware their planet is going to burn up. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
It's not very clear, because I think when I was thinking about this, it's like that makes sense. In episode 4, they invade the base. They're going to use the bomb to destroy the Earth because they can't stop the energy drain. So the Earth has to be destroyed first. So what are they doing in episode 2?
Yeah.
Episode 2, they're going around interviewing the base staff. It's like
because they're going to take them back.
But it's like if they're going to use the bomb to destroy the Earth, if that was their main objective, why didn't they just get on with it in episode 2?
But it wasn't their main objective. This was an adapted plan because the original plan was going wrong. That's my interpretation.
That was mine as well, that they knew, they suddenly realized what was actually happening, and I think the only one who knew it the whole time was the Doctor. It felt like that he was more aware through Ben and everyone else, and not the Doctor himself. That I always felt that the Doctor had pretty much understood how this was going to go, but the Cybermen adapted based on new information.
I guess another surprise could be interpreted as, well, we knew that Mondas was going to blow up for 50 minutes of the story pretty much, but we didn't know that would also bring about the demise of the Cybermen. So yeah. I'm not wondering this while I'm watching, but I guess a viewer could have been wondering, well, aren't we going to be left with however many Cybermen there are said to be on the planet? So I guess that what that discussion tells us is that perhaps the story, well, if you want to look on the bright side, there are multiple interpretations possible. But on the other side, it's not very crisply explained. But it probably would benefit from having the footage back. Interesting.
Yeah.
The cybernetics thing is a terrific idea. It's an aspect of the Cybermen which is lost over the years.
Sadly.
And brought back, in instances like in Earthshot where you can actually see a human chin moving underneath the chin plate. And of course, it's brought back in spades in the Moffat era very effectively. But yeah, I think that's a terrific theme. Well done, Kit Pedler.
What I love about that, especially in 10th Planet, it's not so much that that they are conquering, that they're trying to build like an army. They're just, the way I interpret it is that they're just trying to survive. And I prefer that, over, I mean, I understand that that's a limited story if you want to keep bringing them back. But the original intention of them in the 10th Planet, I think is truly brilliant, because it's like, even though that they have the ability to live forever, technically, with these spare parts, that they still needed to do something to survive, because they actually were not going to survive.
Sure. Internationalism is an interesting thing with Cybermen, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because I realised that obviously we have a base here with a Canadian in charge, a Bermudan astronaut, and a black astronaut at that, which Earl Cameron was delighted and surprised to be cast as, because that was unimaginable at the time. And people who listened to our last podcast listened to how the black character is treated in that. So that's a really positive aspect. But he's got an Australian co-pilot with a German name. There's an Italian on the base. There's an American in the base. They have a Greek boss. But isn't it interesting that the first 4 Cybermen stories all have this international scientific team in them? Happens in the moon base. One of them's French, so he wears a neckerchief. It happens in Tomb of the Cybermen. That's an international team. And then the Wheel in Space, of course, with some very dodgy makeup. But I don't know what to say about that, but it is a thing, isn't it? It's always an international, in near future.
I think it might have been production subtitles on the DVD. I can't remember if it was. They said that that's the contrast between the Cybermen, where there is no diversity, and they're all uniform. And then in the humans, you've got all these people of different nationalities and all this variety. And I'd never thought of that before. It never occurred to me. But the fact that that's a common theme throughout a lot of those early Cyberman stories is like, how intentional was that in terms of the writing, or was that just coincidence?
I was just going to say, I never thought of that either. It felt like watching 10th Planet, watching the different cultures together. It really did feel like 60s optimism, but without it being like overly so. It just seemed right. It seemed like the right balance on everything, and that it just really felt like everyone's working together, and we have this plight. And I love that, David. I love the idea of, Cybermen are all conformed in uniform, and that's the difference. I never thought of that before.
It's kind of prescient then for Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, isn't it? Multicultural, multinational cast, a multinational crew. Yeah, interesting. Also interesting the space travel thing, because this, they're talking about the moonshot. Have we got the moon yet? And this is a few years before. And it's quite nice that they're talking about it, a mission has just come back and it's an everyday thing. That was quite prescient. And I think that's something we miss now. Whenever Doctor Who does space travel by rocket, it's always because it was happening at that time. So I imagine you'd have a different sort of emotional connection with that if you were watching at the time than we do now. Something that Greg touched on is that the Doctor has foresight of the events, and we'll get on to the Doctor. But I've seen it argued and written that this story is written as an historical, but from the Doctor's perspective. So they do very little different in terms of the plotting of a historical thing, because the Doctor knows everything that's going to happen. So he's trying to avoid the fate of what is going to occur. I found that an interesting perspective. And they don't do that again, do they? Where the Doctor throughout knows what's going to happen next. I don't think they do that again in Doctor Who, really.
I feel like the closest that they do that with is like with Attack of the Cybermen, in a sense, because they're well aware of the year. It's 85 and Attack of the Cybermen. 10th Planet takes place in 86.
Sure.
In my opinion, I guess I like to look at it. I prefer to look at it as that the Doctor is just very smart and not seeing it. I can see why people are like, well, I see it from the fact that he knows this is history. He knows it. But it's kind of like also him running into the Daleks for the first time in the second story, that it's not like there is all this time war and stuff like this that has preceded, or that even now is running amok through the timeline, that these are new instances for him. But in the case of the Doctor and the 10th Planet, he is such an evolved scientist that he sees what's happening, and he's just like, we don't have to worry about it. We have to play for time here.
Sure. Moving on. You're a kid in 1966 watching your favorite show, and at the end the main character collapses and changes into someone else. What must the kids have thought? I mean, the adults would have known to a degree that this was going to happen. I just can't get into my head how that must have gone down. Do either of you have any insights to that?
For me, I didn't know that Davison was going to regenerate at the end of Caves of Androzani. Though the difference there is I knew that the other actors had played the role. There is an established, I understand that. So even the regeneration is a shock to me. I understand the concept. Back in 1966, you're right. Who's going to know? I mean, how do you react to it? And if right away, I mean, I can't imagine that a lot of kids would have been like, yay, Hartnell's out. I mean, I'm sure they all would have been devastated by this, as this was, their hero. They've watched him for, it's only 3 years, but the amount of episodes made probably made it seem like so much more.
Yeah, indeed, because those days it was never off the air. Well, it was off the air for, a handful of weeks a year between seasons. Yeah, and so you're literally growing up watching this character in your formative years, and then gone.
The fact that it actually happens in the context of the series, because in other series, particularly in the 60s as well, recasts between series happened. I mean, I was not long watched the Pathfinders trilogy, and various characters get recast between series. So if you're a kid watching a series in the 60s, somebody else is now playing character X. But the fact that they do it as part of the story and actually acknowledge that the character has changed in appearance, that's something different. Because when you read about some of these other concepts about how they were going to write Hartnell out and bring somebody else in, it's the fact that this is the one that happened where they actually had a proper changeover that just secured the longevity of the show.
Yeah, indeed.
Because we couldn't have the Celestial Toymaker popping back every 3 or 4 years, making him invisible and bringing him back with a new face.
Well, and it's too, it's like how many times have we seen, to your point, David, that there's characters being replaced and stuff, and most of the time they're just attempt at carbon copies of that original character, but very often to a lesser degree. Look at Alo for some really great examples of that. And it's just here, to your point, I think, which is brilliant, is that if you didn't have that in there, this show would have probably tanked. I mean, it suddenly gave it really gave a whole new dimension to this character that no one would have ever thought of before. It was so unheard of.
Bernard Quatermass manages to change personality 3 times. 10 years earlier. Anyway.
Well, I was watching The Crown, and every time that a new person played the Queen, I was expecting a regeneration scene, and I was very disappointed every time. It's not, they just didn't do anything about it. Would have made the show much better.
Just on Quatermass, I did see an interaction with one of the fantastic Quatermass commentators that are around, interacting with someone on Twitter because they were complaining that they changed the casting of Bernard Quatermass after the first outing. And he was like, come on, he died.
Yeah. He was truly unavailable.
He was, yeah. Now, Z-bombs, which is, a play on the A-bomb.
Right.
A little whinge from me on this, in that I don't understand why Ben calls it a Z-bomb when to Ben it would be a Z-bomb. But it's kind of... So the plotting of the 10th Planet, I want to just try and unpick this a little bit. Episode 1, superb. Can't fault it. Sets the scene. You end up with this terrific alien invasion at the end and the spooky stare into the camera. Episode 2, as per normal Doctor Who, the aliens are revealed. And you've got a really interesting 17 minutes or so of Jarl, the main Cyberman character, having that brilliant, interesting exchange with the characters. And you can't quite pigeonhole what he's up to or what his views are on things. He makes some interesting points and so on. And I think that's utterly fascinating. And then he's killed off. You know, they're killed off because Ben escapes and they shoot him down. And then you've got 8 minutes of the rest of episode 2. Then episode 3, it's about the Z-bomb. And it's completely removed from the previous 2 episodes in the sense that it's just about the bomb. There are no Cybermen in it. It happens that the Doctor isn't in it. And it's just about the Z-bomb. It's about the derangement of Cutler. And then episode 4 sort of gets back on the horse. Cybermen reappear. How are you guys with that? Do you find it flows, or do you find it a derailment? Or
Yeah, I think it's almost as if they brought the Cybermen in episode 2, and it's like, what do we do with them between 2 and 4?
Exactly.
Because subsequent Cyberman stories, particularly things like the Moon Base, which follows a lot of similar beats to 10th Planet, is that it's restructured. And most, if not all, of the other 60 Cyberman stories, the Cybermen actually don't get involved properly in their stories until later.
Indeed.
So they only come active at the end of episode 2 of Tomb. They're sort of skulking in the shadows in Moonbase 2. They don't appear in Wheel in Space until episode 3, end of episode 2, episode 3, and Invasion, end of episode 4. So it's almost like they learn we can't have the Cybermen too involved in the story too soon. Even in Revenge of the Cybermen, they don't properly invade until the end of part 2. Yeah. So I wonder if that's sort of Gerry Davis realizing you've got to hold them off a bit, and because otherwise they've invaded the base. What we're going to do until we get to the need to ramp up to a climax. And in fact, actually, it's quite unique to have Cybermen having so much dialogue in episode 2, because most of the episode 2s of the Cybermen in the 60s, they barely speak.
Yeah. I also just want to add to that too, as an American, Cutler is off the rails, and it just he was always a very stereotypical, a hard-nosed American army character, right? I mean, at least we know he's Canadian. Robert Beatty's Canadian, but I mean, I and no doubt in my mind, I look at him as an American, and he does, just when he even talks about the Z-bomb, he goes, "The Z-bomb, mister." That whole thing is ridiculously stereotypical, and it does kind of, when I watch 10th Planet, I get to episode 3, and I'm just like, this is really not very good, unfortunately. It's you would think that's because Hartnell's sick, he has bronchitis. No, it's not that at all. It's everything else to do with the Z-bomb, and it just seems to be, it's a big deal in one episode, and it's immediately shut down in the 4th episode. Yeah, they're trying to dismantle it in the 4th episode, but that's more of a prop than actually a story plot. I
think you both hit nails on heads there. In my actual notes that I was writing while I watched it, I actually wrote, they've actually run out of things to do here with the Cybermen in episode 2. And we'll talk about characters shortly, but I think 2 points. Beatty is very one note throughout. He's always hard-nosed. He's always angry. And so when you have a mental disintegration in a character, I want that to be Lesterson in the next story. They clearly have a mental disintegration. But Beatty's character maintains that hard-nosed American throughout. And so it doesn't quite match what he's saying, in that I think the story is trying to tell us that he'd be willing to risk sacrificing half of the population of planet Earth because his son is in a distress situation in a rocket.
Yeah.
But it's quite hard to get into the emotion of that because he is the same character throughout. And as soon as they finish with that Z-bomb episode, they kill him off and then get on with the story. So I found that quite interesting as an observation. But then it's quite surprising that there's a line of dialogue from Polly, who actually plays to this and says, "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" And he said, "I've got really high stakes in this. So I've got, and then she apologizes. So the story actually acknowledges in its dialogue that Beatty is this slightly rough and ready, hard-nosed American frontiersman sort of, or, GI sort of character.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't quite reconcile it all in my head, but something about it doesn't quite gel for me. And I think the main thing is that complete derailment during episode 3 to make it about the Z-bomb and then forget about the Z-bomb in episode 4, the Cybermen are back. And I think David actually hit the nail on the head, really, in that they'd run out of plot. So, yeah, I found that, I think that's one of my issues with it, the plotting with this story. Mm-hmm. And then episode 4, we're back on track again. And I think what we're really missing with episode 4 is there is some good action, when they're battling the Cybermen with the fuel rods or whatever they are. I think that's probably really good stuff. And it ties it all up. And then you have perhaps the surprise that the Cybermen disintegrate when the planet disintegrates. Although I think I would have just tied those two together and had that as the surprise at the end. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I find episode 3 sticks out like a sore thumb. It doesn't really matter though that William Hartnell wasn't in it, because they sort of obviously dispose of his dialogue or reattribute his dialogue, but he wouldn't have had much to say anyway because he was being written as a character who was being weakened in episode 3. So yeah, it's episode 3 is strange, and I guess it's a sad state of affairs that it's the last one of the era that exists in the archive, and it doesn't have Hartnell in it, and it doesn't have the Cybermen in it.
Thus being top tier, Tim. That's thus being top tier.
Well, I did say at the top that while I reviewed it, I actually want the 4th episode back a lot more, because I think my motivation for that is to give it a better send-off than the rather strange episode 3 that exists for me. And I think episode 1 and 2 are actually pretty damn great. And episode 4 is obviously good. But the rhythm of it has always been slightly strange for me. I'm not interested in Z-bombs, nor Z-bombs.
And if I may, I don't miss Cutler one bit after he's gone. By the time I get to the end of episode 3, I don't care about him. I don't like him. I don't want any. As soon as he's gone, it's almost a relief, because it's like now we can get on with Cybermen again. Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with not liking a character. Some of the best characters are unlikable, but he's boring, isn't he?
Yeah, it's not a dislike because of like good acting. It's like, oh, you're really connecting with me, and even if it's a bad way, it's just like, just get out of here. Scram is what I say.
So we've gone into characters. So let's talk about the characters and the performances. David, tell us about the Doctor.
Is he in this? Because it was really, I mean, it's always obvious, but it was really obvious this most recent watch show preparing for this, that once they arrive at Snowcap, they go into the tracking room and he's basically in there, apart from a couple of jaunts out throughout the rest of the episode. He doesn't leave that set in episode 2, and then he's unconscious in episode 3. And you get the sense that it's marking time in terms of the script writing, in terms of, we've got 4 episodes, he's leaving at the end of it. How can we minimize as much as possible?
Yeah.
Until the first 15 minutes of episode 4. And this is what I think we're missing, is he comes back, back after his week off, and I think he's actually, from the soundtrack, he gives a really decent final performance in that first 15 minutes before he gets carted off to the cyber ship and that's him gone. And I think we're missing some great little moments. We see fractions of it in the 8mm footage. But yeah, I just think I think he does the best he can with a very underwritten role. I think what was interesting going through with the camera script again is that he's about as word perfect with the script for Hartnell as everybody else is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everybody else, certainly Robert Beatty, he's always around the dialogue. He's never giving it quite as on the page. But Hartnell, he doesn't have any major fluffs throughout. He's pretty much, giving what's needed. But there's a little, it's not his best performance. But again, he hasn't got a lot to work with.
Yeah. To your point, it's like I can only think of a couple things that Hartnell says dialogue-wise that are really memorable. Everything else are just kind of like throwaway lines, reaction lines, like in arguing with the Cybermen in episode 2, and he's why, he says, and other people take on the rest of the dialogue. I find also, I never really thought about it, but in my rewatch, watching episode 4, the animation, listening to Hartnell's soundtrack and forgetting, like, he just came back from being sick, and he does put everything into it. And it's just kind of perhaps a happy coincidence that he sounds weaker. He doesn't sound like himself. He sounds like he's kind of really trying to get the words out. And maybe I'm just overthinking it, just like I'm also overthinking, some nice unplanned parallels with an unearthly child. He's wearing basically the outfit that he wore in his first appearance. There's this lovely point when it's far from being all over, and he comes right up to the camera. To me, it's very, very much reminds me of in the junkyard talking to Ian and Barbara, and he's looking away from them, looking at the camera in the same outfit. And I know it's not meant to be that way, but I like it because it kind of is a nice bookend to these appearances. And I agree. I think he gave it his all, and it is not his best performance, but it works well enough for me in the context of the story.
It's interesting. In parts 1 and 2, he does get the lines accurate, but I'm not quite sure whether it's Hartnell's fault or Martinez's fault. But he often is trying to stay his dialogue and his reactions over other people speaking. And it feels like that isn't well done. It feels like if that's intentional, then he hasn't got the power to make that work. But it feels to me like his timing is off. And I think he doesn't appear like he's at the full height of his powers. And I think he's clearly knackered. What's interesting in part 4 is that part 3 and 4, the character is written as someone who is running out of energy, as someone who is approaching the end of their life. And I'd be tempted to argue that he accomplishes that extremely well. And I think the glimpses that we can see are very unusual for Hartnell's Doctor to do that physical stuff. When he stumbles towards the camera as he's leaving the cyber ship, and that lovely shot of him almost in silhouette, of him leaning on the TARDIS console before he collapses. I think that's great from Hartnell. I think that's different to almost anything else he's ever done. It's a poignant performance, and it shows some of his range that we've not actually seen. And they did say that he was very keen to come back and give it his best for episode 4. And I'd like to think that the script says, you're playing a dying man. So he plays a dying man. And I really like that. But they don't give him anything to do. They're marking time, aren't they? Like David said, they can't wait for him to sod off. But right. I think he plays it really. I think the second half, sorry, not the second half, the last episode, I think he does some stuff, some extraordinary stuff for him.
The idea of the Doctor in the Cybermen spaceship when Ben comes to rescue him and Polly, and the way that Hartnell plays the Doctor is not a way that we've ever seen it. He is very vulnerable. It kind of akin to like the radiation sickness way back in the first Dalek serial, but he's just for someone who's so authoritative, and he's very crisp in his speaking, and very it's the Doctor. This is somebody who is done. And that when I watched it recently, for some reason it hit me more this time that it's like this, we've not seen this. I wonder what the viewers and the children thought when they were watching it. We talked about the regeneration, what they thought of that, but even this had to ring some some alarm bells for
Yeah.
children watching, like, what's happened to our hero? The story's over. We won. What's going on here?
Greg, tell us about Ben.
So I like Michael Craze. Let's just start with that. I like Michael Craze. I like him as a person. Ben has kind of, in my mind, two octaves, two ways of acting, and a lot of it is kind of shouty. Even, like, do you want some tea, Gov? I mean, it's a bit, for me, it's like I'm on edge whenever I watch him. He's so intense. It's everything is kind of, and I wish he was around, because it'd been interesting. I've never seen anyone really ask him about that, and maybe I'm the only one that sees it that way. I don't know, that it's just even the subtle stuff. I mean, some of the stuff in the rocket room when he's trying to convince Dyson that you have no choice. Either you help or you die. Either way, it's probably going to be the same result. I mean, that was a little bit better, but most everything I see him in is just, very kind of aggressive to me. And I'm not saying that it's bad, but it's just, especially in this, it's just been really a lot. And I worry about Ben, because how much of a concussion must he have had being thrown off? And it sounds like he fell like stories from the top of the rocket to the ground. I mean, his yell, you could hear it like he's going down like flights, like it's a skyscraper. I mean, he shouldn't even be alive. And, you get a little bit at the end of episode 3 is my head splitting. But then episode 4, a miraculous recovery, and the poor doctor's dying, but Ben, he's doing amazing. But it's just like, wow, that's one, I think, is one of the most brutal things I've ever seen done to a companion. The way that they got rid of, the way that they pushed him over and stuff, that was pretty intense too.
He's carrying it. He is a bit intense,
Mm-hmm.
but I think he, takes on the Cybermen in episode 2 with the film projector. He's leading the rebellion against Cutler in episode 3, and he's rallying the troops in episode 4.
Mm-hmm.
He's effectively the lead
He is,
in the story. And, I don't think he does too bad a job. I think it's almost like you do kind of wonder, why couldn't they give some of that stuff to Hartnell in episode 4? Why does he have to get carted up? Okay, because he's dying.
Mm-hmm.
But, some of the stuff in either radiation room or something like that, they could have the Doctor a bit more involved, potentially, if they wanted to. They just didn't want to. So, marking time with the Doctor, therefore, we've got to build Ben up. Bit of a shame about poor Polly.
Well, quite. I mean, I have to say I really enjoyed Ben. I get that he's quite shouty, but he has a different energy to what's come before. I also find it really interesting that there's this sort of morality there, which we don't see very often, in that he kills the Cyberman in episode 2, and he's immediately remorseful.
Yeah,
I can't think of too many instances of that. You didn't give me no choice, mate. And then there's other morality stuff going on later, when in episode 4, where the Doctor says to the Cybermen in a scene with Ben there, we owe you our lives. And it's sort of, you're not quite sure that we should be viewing the Cybermen in such black and white. It's quite interesting. And that's thanks to Ben starting that off by saying, you didn't give me any choice about killing you. As if we're supposed to have some sympathy towards the Cybermen almost.
Mm-hmm.
Polly makes the coffee, doesn't she?
Yeah. She gets a couple of nice bits in episode 2 confronting the Cybermen. But in episode 3, she's making the coffee. She has a little bit with Barclay. Episode 4, she's carted off to the spaceship. And I think it all goes back to a common theme through some of the Pedler Gerry Davis scripts, in that they do not give good roles for women generally.
No.
Or roles at all for women. They just want it to be a boys' club, and Polly's there, unfortunately, in the first 2 Cybermen stories. What can you brew up while the men sort it out? It's a shame.
It's even worse when she will say herself, I'll go make the coffee or anything. It's really cringy. And also, you brought up that line earlier when she said to Cutler, I think you're enjoying this. And I always feel bad for her when I watch it, because his response isn't good enough for her to basically apologize for it. It doesn't warrant an apology, in my opinion. He's still playing tin soldier there.
Yeah.
And as far as I see, and the fact is that she stood up to him, and then she immediately backed down. And I always feel bad for her on that, because she shouldn't have. It didn't warrant that. It didn't warrant any sort of back down from that character.
Sure. We've talked about Cutler already. So Robert Beatty was a bit of a star, but he happened to have worked with Hartnell on a couple of films. And Beatty was the star of a show called Dial 999, in which Hartnell had guested. So, I've shared my views on Cutler, and so have you, Greg. It's quite interesting that the next time I see him on telly, he's playing a sort of space hippie in Blake 7.
Yep.
Which is a complete contrast to General Cutler.
I wonder whether or not Beatty's playing it very... He's found the level for it, because in some of the dialogue early in episode 1, he's a little bit more playful. He's making sort of jokes when they radio the Zeus 4 in that sort of opening scene.
There's a danger that he's going to make penguin jokes throughout, because he makes 2 penguin jokes in the first 5 minutes, doesn't he?
Yeah. And then all of a sudden he just kind of comes gruff throughout. And it's like, is that if he'd played, kind of built on the kind of gruff but playful, but then that sort of fell away as the crisis deepened, that might have been a bit more, but it is a bit one note.
Yeah. I don't really have anything to say on the stock scientists. Dudley Jones doesn't offer much for me. I find the David Doddymead Barclay character more engaging, more charismatic, more interesting, distinctive, and so on. Anything on those guys, or the rest of the base personnel?
The fact they couldn't give most of them names. You've got radio technician, RT technician, Geneva technician, American sergeant. Only Tito gets a name.
Yeah, that's true.
But there's not, certainly with those stock scientists, there is there's nothing wrong. I think David Doddymead gives a good performance, but he's probably the only one of that lot that actually makes any impression. I think Dyson is a bit of a dreary character anyway. Yeah, not very exciting.
But this is exciting. Steve Plytus as Wigner. It's exciting because, David, you've made one of the best British TV observations I've ever seen on Twitter, and it's not a Doctor Who one.
It's so, and I will have to give credit. I didn't know about this. Somebody said it happened. I just went and found it and shared it.
Right.
So Steve Plytus is guest starring in 1963 episode of The Avengers, Immortal Clay. He's the villain in it, and sort of very greasy international villain. And he's having a coffee and cake with Kathy Gale on a Blackman. And mid-scene, he clearly forgets his line.
Yeah.
And this is it's still as live, but it's still being recorded. So, and there's a story that Hartnell told Xenia Merton, which is, if you want to force a retake, you say a certain 4-letter word.
Yes.
So obviously he's dried, and he doesn't say it very loudly, but it's very audible. He drops the F-bomb.
He does.
At which point then Honor Blackman then feeds him the correct line, and they get the scene back on track. But yes, and there's always when was the first time that particular word was said on British television? It's like, well, there's the one we all know about, but here is an earlier instance. So I shared that on Twitter as was, and it just kept, every now and again, it keeps getting shared or popping back.
Yeah.
So my apologies to Steve Plytas for basically the bit clip of him on social media is him making a mistake.
And Greg, you pointed out that I hadn't clocked it, but where else does Steve Plytus appear famously?
Well, this might give you a clue. His big line is Manuel. And, he's in Gourmet Night of Alti Towers. And he's the one that has a big old crush on Manuel, and he gets so drunk because after being sober for so long, he gets so drunk because Manuel does not accept his advances.
I've never placed him there. I've seen Fawlty Towers a million times, but I've never put the two together.
And of course, he's sharing the scenes there with is it Andre Moran from Moonbase?
He runs the restaurant. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess my summary to all that would have been: would episode 3 have been improved if they'd have been exploding an F-bomb rather than a Z-bomb? And then I've left them almost till last. But in terms of the rest of the cast, Earl Cameron as Williams and Alan White as Schultz, I think they're excellent. I think they're both excellent. I know Schultz doesn't have a lot to say in it, but he's got a really expressive, interesting face. And you get to over those first 2 episodes, you get to really get into what they're doing. And that makes their demise at the end of episode 2 quite harrowing, really, that you've got these 2 almost lead support characters in there, and they're gone, they're dead. And that's foreshadowed by Giles saying, well, they're going to die. There's nothing you can do about it. And you want to believe, and you do believe, that they're going to get rescued. But nope, gone.
And it's done in such a way that it's directed so well, because it's not, you don't hear explosion, you don't hear them scream. It's just done, and it's silent in the control room.
Yeah. But again, it's another interesting element of the story that's wrapped up in episode 2. So you lose those 2. You lose Hartnell, not his fault, not the character's fault, but you lose Hartnell. You lose the Cybermen, and then you almost have this standalone 25 minutes in episode 3. But yeah, Earl Cameron's great, and he lived to a ripe old age, didn't he? 100 plus.
Yeah.
And sadly passed away a couple of years ago. So let's talk about the Cybermen. They're so different don't forget, this is serial DD, and they're back for serial HH. So within a matter of months, they're back. And within a matter of months, they have a complete redesign, probably for practical purposes, because the costumes were falling to pieces, weren't they? And overheating and the rest of it. But they redo the voices. They have a complete rethink. So what do we think about these original Cybermen?
I really like the original design. I think when I first saw them, it was like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Because growing up with 80s Cybermen, sleek designs, and then all of a sudden there's something that looks cobbled together, and you've got the human hands and everything. But actually, now thinking that design represents better what they are in the story, which is there are these cobbled together, desperate, dying race. And I think that design really plays to it. And it's a real shame that we can see the sellotape holding the costume together now. But the one thing, I don't know if it was deliberate or not, because you see this on websites with the list mistakes in episodes. It's like, you can see the Cybermen's eyes.
Yeah.
Is that a mistake, or was that intentional? Because they've got the human hands. So I'm not so sure.
There's also a debate whether the hands are intentional. There's a story that Annika Wills tells that Sandra Reed, on her debut story, forgot the gloves and was mortified. So we're not quite sure about the eyes, and we're not quite sure about the hands, but they're very effective. Whether it's by accident or design, they're both terrifying.
I think what I love about that costume, and I think it is my favorite of all of them in the 60s, Cybermen are my favorite in general, is that there are so many layers to it that you can discover. It wasn't until we got better copies that we could see the eyes through the mask, at least for us, at least for me. There's that plastic lining on the outside of like the suit that is weird, but it's really kind of cool with it. Everything about it is to what David said is like, what on earth is this? But it actually, to me, it would work, and it does work very well. I think it's interesting. Like, it's one of those type of costumes that I think very few people can actually recreate very well at all. I have 9 Cybermen helmets in my collection, and I've seen people try to create a 10th planet, a stocking mask and whatever. It never looks like it does in the 10th planet. When you see people try to draw it, you could very rarely get it drawn the way that it looks in the story, because there's so much texture and it's just cloth, and sometimes that's harder to recreate and make it look the way that it did in the 60s. I also find it interesting that there are no color photos of the Cybermen. There's no color photos from the 10th planet at all. And I think that's a shame. I think there's a lot of great opportunities for photos on the 10th planet that we missed out on. But it would have been nice to see what the Cybermen looked like in a actual color photo.
Sure. Do you like the names? Do you like the fact they have names? They keep doing this, don't they? Or they do it in the future. They introduce a monster and the Ice Warriors and they give them all names, and then they drop the names, and then the Silurians, when they bring them back, they give them names and so on. I think it's fun. I think it's fine. But what about the voices?
I really like the voices. I was like you said before, on Cybermen the early years when they played two clips on that. First was the first appearance in episode 1. They played the clip of them talking for the first time. And again, having never seen them before, that design, they started speaking and it was just, that's different. And looking at it now, I think I see what they were going for, and I think it really works. And I think Roy Skelton, who does the voices primarily, nails it. I think it's really effective.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And it never heard anything like it before. And there's like a slight hum undertone with every syllable that comes out of those Cybermen voices that I think is it really adds to it, and they're very talkative in it as well. So yeah, it's a really fun and unique entry into it. And when I first saw it, they were my least favorite voices because it sounded so different. But now the uniqueness is what makes it great.
Yeah, is it Peter Hawkins who does the other voices? Is he the backup cyber voice? There's one of them, I can't quite discern who it is, but in the later episodes, the Cybermen go extremely sing-song.
Yeah,
and I find that not quite as effective as Skelton playing Jarl.
No,
I think that's a brilliant performance.
I was just going to say, because that reminded me, what I was also going to mention was that in episode 4, it became for me increasingly more difficult to understand what they were saying.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of like they're getting elevated, and for a creature that doesn't have emotions, they were kind of showing some emotion there, and that wasn't working for me. Nor when you'd hear them through a speaker. Either when they're in world headquarters or whatever we're calling it, and you're hearing it in Snowcap, it's like I don't really understand. That's not working for me. I don't hear what they're saying.
Sure, and the dialogue is quite interesting. The speech. So he's oddly polite, isn't he? That really is most unfortunate.
Oh, shit.
And I found them quite thought provoking as well. I thought when the two astronauts are going to die and care, why should I care? People die on your planet all the time, and you don't give a monkeys. I thought that might not be a word for word quote, but
you said monkeys. Yeah,
I found that quite thought provoking.
And name please,
Yeah.
Name please, just like, oh, okay, I'll give you name. You said please.
I think it's when he says foregone conclusion. I don't know why, but that always just doesn't feel like a Cyberman piece of dialogue.
That's the name of David Brent's band. So before we get on to the missing episodes aspects, let's all give a review. I'll give mine first because everyone knows where I'm coming from with this. It's kind of like the Celestial Toymaker to me. It's got a really powerful idea, the Cybermen idea with the body horror and the moral question and when they lose their soul. I find that utterly fascinating. And as I've said, I think episodes 1 and 2 are great, but I think they're running out of steam within minutes of them introducing them. So they go off on this C-bomb episode 3 derailment, which I find really difficult to get into the rhythm. But episode 4 is really good. And so I don't want episode 4 back because I feel I need to understand what it looks like. I feel I'd like episode 4 back because I think that story needs ending in a pleasing way. And you don't get a sense of the rhythm of it via the animation at all. So I've had a difficult experience watching this one and trying to enjoy it, but I can see the potential in it. I can see the potential in having episode 4 back, but similar to the Celestial Toymaker for me, brilliant idea. Could have been done better.
I think it is hard to ignore the plotting problems and issues in the story and the structure. But I've always enjoyed it. I think it rattles along quite nicely. I think the production holds up really well. There's a lot of interesting ideas going on. So yeah, I think it's not one of those ones where I think, oh, this is awful because it hasn't been plotted perfectly. I do think, compare it to something like some of the stuff in season 3, which has got a little bit, there's more layers to some of those season 3 stories, like say the Savages, where there's all these philosophical concepts and stuff, and they're sort of there in 10th Planet, but I don't feel like they really get under the skin. So they have the cybernetic stuff and they sort of touch on it, but then it's only in episode 2 because they're not in episode 3, and episode 4 it's just about survival. So the sort of body horror aspect is only in episode 2, but it's a story I always enjoy to watch. And as I say, it's 90 minutes and doesn't outstay its welcome, even though it has got that problem with episode 3 being a huge amount of padding. But it's not the worst padding of a Doctor Who story ever. So I'm firmly on the fence. I think it has got issues, but I like it.
And then just before we get to Greg, in one of my notes, I felt when I was watching it that it's one of the few stories. It's a really lazy critique to say that most 6-parters in Doctor Who could be 4-parters. But I actually felt this might benefit from being expanded so that you can lose an episode to a Z-bomb and it doesn't take up 1/3 of the main plot, because episode 1 is all introduction. And I think they could have done more of that conversation with the Cybermen and so on. Anyway, I'll shut up. Greg.
No, I mean, that's an interesting thought. I mean, I'm a big fan of the story. I always have been, and it's like the both of you. I see the faults with the story, and I've heard some people, I've read some people say that if the Doctor and companions didn't show up, it would be the same ending, and that's not true because you needed Ben there to stop the Z-bomb from happening because it would have still gone down that route. But overall, the idea of getting there and doing nothing, just playing out the time, it's going to take care of itself. That's in my mind, that's kind of a problem with the story because what's the point then? But I love the production design. I love the Cybermen. I love the fact of that era of Doctor Who. So I'm always been a fan of it. And like David, it doesn't outstay its welcome. And I tend to watch it on a fairly regular basis, actually.
Great. Fantastic. Let's move on to the missing episodes aspect. So we're missing episode 4. We've had episodes 1, 2, and 3 all the time. They were found to exist in, I think, the Film Archive in 1977. But we do have, happily, we have the regeneration itself, and that was used in a 1973 episode of Blue Peter, and we'll get onto that shortly. We do have, amazingly, 14 snippets on that famous 8mm film, which was obtained by Jan Vincent Ruski, which was taken off screen by a fan in Australia. So to hear more about the provenance of that film, then go back and listen to our Galaxy 4 episode where we interview Jan about that. 14 clips from this episode. Amazing. There are several audio copies that exist, and up until recently, the best audio copy was indisputably Graham Strong's. And, it's said that the quality of that audio recording is better than the optical soundtrack that exists on the films, which is amazing. And by a complete happy coincidence, Graham Strong's recording stops where the Blue Peter footage takes up. So we've got high quality audio throughout.
And also the Randolph tapes.
Indeed, and that's why I said until recently. So just quickly explain the Randolph tapes for everyone, Greg.
Just very quickly, that it's a real tape that a lot of episodes were recorded that seem to be similarly recorded to how Graham how Graham did them, but they're very concise in their start and end. Each episode is in full, and they must be a dub down actually from original recordings, because the opening credits are always exactly the start. There isn't any sort of like 3-second delay. There isn't any BBC continuity. But what is really cool about these recordings is, such as on Celestial Toymaker, you get the voiceover at the end of the episode. You also get that for Power of the Daleks. And in my un-audio file opinion, I feel like these recordings are just a little bit better than Graham's. I think they're really strong recordings, and it's probably no one knows this for sure, because they were literally found like on its way to going to a skip, basically about 5 years ago. The way that it's laid out in the tape, that this is not tape number 1. That there would have been more tapes, but it just so happened this is what was found. And who knows how many that this person had recorded over time, because we don't know who recorded it. We only know who found it and returned it to Kaleidoscope.
Sure. And the Kaleidoscope handed to Mark Ayres. So Mark Ayres has these, and he was working on them, and he's not really had an opportunity to flex his muscles with them yet or show them off, because they were all out on DVD before this tape was found. And I guess what's important about them as well is that I learned during recording this podcast is that while Graham Strong's, the quality of them is exceptional, crystal clear, the actual physical condition of the tapes is poor, and the oxide is falling off them. So it'll be really interesting to hear what Mark Ayres can do with that as he puts together his patchwork quilt of bits of audio from everywhere. It'll be interesting to see how things improve. So in 2012, 2013, there was a really, I think it's an excellent DVD release, 2-disc, with the animation of episode 4 on there. What do you guys think of the animation?
I think that the animation is that, for me, it made the return of episode 4 maybe a little less at least not as necessary as I would have said so before. You know, I still consider it a top tier return, but I felt pretty good about the animation itself. And one reason why, and one thing I always liked about Planet 55, is you can pull out all of the telesnaps for 10th Planet and Moonbase, and you can match them up to scenes, and they're pretty spot on with them. And I do appreciate that. And I understand there's a reason why the new animations go a different route, and I'm fine with that. But there is something about knowing that these folks who did those episodes did them as close to the source material as they can. And as a absolute purist as I am, I appreciate that.
I can be really boring by saying I really like it too, because I seem to like everything. I think of following, having watched the Reign of Terror animation, it was a nice surprise that it worked better, because Reign of Terror's animation for me did not work well at all. It just was a bit of a mess. So when 10th Planet was being made by in a similar style, you were like, is it going to be cut? And it is incredibly sympathetic to the surviving episodes. And in that sort of debate with animation, I think I'm always going to watch the existing material, and I would like animation that fits with it. I get why they go their own path, why they do things the way they do. But I think if I was to watch some of the other stories and watch the existing episode in between, it just doesn't flow in the same way. This flow, the animation flows from those first 3 episodes really smoothly.
Indeed, and it's sympathetic to the previous episodes, and it gives a good indication of what it might have looked like. I'm not an animation fan. I've said this many times, but I really enjoyed the 10th Planet one. One thing I do find quite distracting, and it's quite interesting that Greg mentioned it mirroring an unearthly child in the visuals, is that because he's in the same costume, they use some shots from an unearthly child for the rotoscoping. I found that a bit distracting. The pose with his finger on his chin saying, "Have you ever wondered?" Yeah. That's in there twice. So I found that pleasingly distracting, shall we say? Kind of thing. I know what you've done there. I know what you've used. So yeah, it's a good release. And also, interestingly, on that release, it's the release that they had the only existing film of William Hartnell being interviewed when he's getting ready for the pantomime, and he's incredibly grumpy.
That is a fantastically grumpy interview.
I'm a proper character actor. Yeah.
His reaction when he's asked, "Do you like appearing in panto?" is just no.
And you could fit your hand around his arms. I mean, he's so skinny.
Yeah,
he's just so like a little twig, and like, oh my God, you're just so skinny. But what a fantastic piece of film, and how interesting. It's like, it was only, it relatively speaking, it's not that long ago, 50 years now, 57 years or whatever, and there was nothing of Hartnell that existed that we could see him out of character talking about Doctor Who or being around that. So it's fantastic.
But it's interesting that he is out of character, in that it's a bit of a nice reminder how much of a performance his character as the Doctor is. So we had that interview turn up of him being incredibly grumpy, and then about the same time, maybe slightly afterwards, they found a large chunk of his appearance on Desert Island Discs, and I didn't recognise him. It took me a minute to, oh, that's him. And so I've always sort of, I mean, I've seen This Sporting Life and one or two other bits, but I've always associated William Hartnell as being the Doctor and that character and all the fluffs to be completely accidental, whereas there is a great deal of character work going on there. So it's a really welcome reminder of that. Just quickly, David, something you raised on Twitter, the telesnaps are really murky that we have copies of. Did you get to the bottom of that?
No, I think so. It's just down to the nature of the telesnap. I think it's not helped by the fact the 8mm clips are also really dark. So I think whenever you look at the telesnaps and most of the surviving footage, it makes episode 4 look like they've turned the lights off. Except for, obviously, there's some shots in the corridor with the Cybermen which look better lit, but in the tracking room, some of those telesnaps look incredibly dark. Now, that might well be something that happened in the story that we can't see, but yeah, the telesnaps certainly they were never shared on BBC website when all the others were. So that was the omission. The reconstruction on the video, the official one, which was also on the DVD, doesn't use all of the telesnaps, and when they've been reprinted, the Doctor Who magazine specials, they are so over-processed. They're really quite bad quality. So I don't think I've ever really seen the full set of 10th Planet telesnaps in good quality.
I do have them from a fresh scan from the originals, and that's where I posted that one in the corridor that I put on Twitter for you, David. And they are better, but you're right. The tracking room stuff is dark. It's just dark in general, and it's really odd. And to your point too, the 8mm footage really it does look like that everyone is lit just from the front and nothing overhead in those shots. You got to wonder what was going on in that episode, and if it had to do with the fact that lights were going on and off during the whole episode, that it was easier to light that way. I don't know.
Sure. Interesting. So, 10th Planet 4 has been a highly desired episode, especially in those early years, as we've already discussed. And for that reason, it's been the subject of hoaxes. So, Greg, tell us your hoax story.
Well, it's a story of how you could be young and stupid to start with. It's really embarrassing to tell, but it's one of those that molds a young man into being a little bit smarter in the future. I had this I got this thing in the mail regarding footage finders, if that makes sense. Like, these people would go out and they would try to find whatever you're looking for, and if they found it, you paid a fee and they would send it to you. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. You don't pay anything until they find it. I'm like, well, then what do I have to lose? And I was like, I would like to find this episode of Doctor Who called The 10th Planet, episode 4. And the place was called 1 in a Million. They haven't been around in years. And I had stipulations. I said, there are lots of telesnap reconstructions. These are what the reconstructions look like. This is what they are. If the footage is not moving, that is not the episode. And so, all these things. And I had two other friends who were willing to pool in money with me. And they're just like, yeah, we want to be a part of this. And I'm like, that's cool. So maybe a month or so later, I hear back from 1 in a Million. They're like, we found it. And I'm like, you found 10th Planet 4? And they're like, yep, we found it. And I'm like, it's not a telesnap reconstruction. And like, nope, we got it for you. And so I think we ended up paying, and God help me for even having to say this live. And I actually reached out to Steve Roberts about it, because I know Steve. And I was just like, this is what I'm running into. This is the cost they want. And he's just like, it's not worth that. It was about $800. And this is 1997, 1998. And I'm like, it doesn't, and he's like, at most, if you're going to pay for it, like 200 pounds. And I'm like, what's wrong with this guy? It's 10th Planet. Of course we want it, and I'm going to be honest, you have visions of grandeur when you're like, I'm going to return 10th Planet 4 to the BBC, and fandom will, scream my name in ecstasy, whatever the weird, thoughts were. So I fronted the money, because I'm like, all right, I'm being nice to my two friends. Like, okay, well, you can pay me later. I'm going to front the money. I can afford it. And I do FedEx overnight, which is, a big deal. And I just, I need it now. I have to have it, a Saturday delivery. I mean, I couldn't sleep that night. I was just like, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to be the first person to watch it in, whatever years. And the FedEx truck pulls up, and they come out with a FedEx pouch. And I'm like, a pouch? It should be like a film can or something, right? I mean, I don't know what I'm supposed to be getting here. And they drop it off, and I open it up, and it's a hard case VHS tape. And I'm just like, okay. And it says the 10th Planet on there, typewritten. And I'm like, okay, this is odd. I put it in, and it starts up the Hartnell titles. I'm like, here we go. And it's episode 1. And I'm like, okay. And it's a T120. So I fast forward it, I stop, and it's episode 2, stop episode 3, whatever. I get to the end of episode 3. I'm like, okay, here we go. And it ends. Episode 4 starts up, the Hartnell title's like, yes. And it is a telesnap reconstruction. And not only is it a telesnap reconstruction, it is one that my friend Robert Franks worked on, who he is helping them with the reconstructions that he has given me free like 5 times. And now I paid for it. And, and it was years before I told him, because I was so mad that his work, and he worked with like Michael Palmer, he worked with Bruce Robinson, all these people, that their work was meant for free. And I really was upset, because if I didn't want them to get disheartened by the fact that their work, their hard work, or anyone with loose cannon, or anyone, that their stuff is being thrown out for such big money, and it's being used to dupe people. So I kept it to myself for quite some time, until I wrote an article for my blog about it. And I think the worst part about it, that was hard enough. And I called up 1 in a Million, and we had words, and they wouldn't back down, and it was horrible. But my two friends who were going to be like, yeah, we want to be a part of this and stuff. And I explained what happened to them. And I'm like, you still are going to, put in for this, right? And they're just like, oh, it's a shame. And that was it.
Oh, Greg.
They didn't even offer. And what they didn't realize, if they would have offered to, like, well, what can I do to help or whatever, I probably would have turned them down, because why should everyone suffer from it? But they didn't even offer. And I was like, wow, this is a great reminder of what some friends could be like. So it wasn't a great experience, but I sure did learn a lot from that. And that was, I hope no one else had to be as ridiculously stupid as I was to find out about it. And I think it's a good reminder about visions of grandeur and visions of, like, what are the reasons why we do these things, why we look for missing episodes or whatever else. If it's for glory, maybe this isn't the right reason to do it.
And there was a very famous hoax involving the 10th Planet episode 4, in that a character called Roger K. Barrett made himself known to Mark Gatiss back in the early 90s, and he purported to have the tape, and various negotiations happened, or the film rather, and then I believe he sent in a Shibboleth that turned out to be blank, And while this was going back and forth, John Nathan Turner was preparing the VHS release, and they were so optimistic that it might be true that they had Michael Craze record 2 introductions to episode 4 of the 10th Planet, one that's saying it's newly been found and one that's saying it's missing from the archive. Anything to add on that one, guys?
I know who Roger K. Barrett is. I know him. He's a friend of mine. But there's actually 2 people that were Roger K. Barrett, and one of them is dead. So it all is something that got widely out of control, and it's a very and I can't go into it any more than that. But yeah, I know, and Roger K. Barrett is no longer in the UK in any form.
You tease.
That's what I do best.
Tell me afterwards. Tell me afterwards. Okay. So let's get on to the prospects of whether we might get to see episode 4 of the 10th Planet. So in the usual way, I'll summarize what we know happened with film recordings of the 10th Planet. So, as usual, the 10th Planet was committed to videotape, and then in order to sell to overseas stations, they transferred it to 16 millimeter and wiped the original tapes. That's a long story cut short. So films were circulated around the world of old black and white Doctor Who, and through the excellent work of people like John Predell and his site Broadcast, we can track pretty much who broadcast what and when. And using that information, we can work out how many copies there were. Now, the 10th Planet, for reasons which aren't really fully understood, only sold in Australia, where it was broadcast in June 1967. So they had a copy, at least one copy. And then New Zealand was sent a copy for broadcast in 1969. And because the excellent Team New Zealand had the film traffic logs from the NZBC, they know that their copy of the 10th Planet was sent to Singapore, where it was broadcast in 1972. So for reasons unknown, it didn't show in all the usual suspect countries such as Zambia and Sierra Leone, and it's speculated that the sales rights for the Cybermen were withdrawn. So it only sold to 3 countries. And famously, we have the regeneration scene from an episode of Blue Peter, which aired in 1973. So we know, or we can speculate with some confidence, that that clip would have been taken from a returned Singapore sales copy. And the reason we know it's the Singapore New Zealand copy and not Australia is because Australia didn't send back a copy of the 10th Planet until 1975, with me so far. So let's just talk about Blue Peter briefly. The clip exists on the episode. It's a very short clip of the regeneration. And there is a myth or a misunderstanding that Blue Peter lost the episode. And that's simply not true. That's a conflation of the story with episode 4 of Dalek's Master Plan, arguably. There is no evidence for this at all. They would have borrowed a copy of the episode from Enterprises, and there is no paperwork to say that it was missing from Enterprises. There is a suggestive document that suggests that the 10th Planet may still have been for sale by Enterprises the year after. So forget Blue Peter losing an episode of the 10th Planet. However, it is speculated on Broadcast that one reason they might have lost an episode of the 10th Planet, episode 4, is because they might have cut the clip out of the actual copy that they borrowed from Enterprises and not a copy that they would normally make themselves. So they borrow a film print, they make their own film recording of it, and then they can butcher it and put together a clips reel or whatever. So that's an interesting conspiracy theory, but there's no evidence for that. So there is no way we can ascertain whether this episode 1, 2, and 3 that exists in the archive are from Australia or from New Zealand, because unhelpfully, sometimes we can discern where these copies came from because they have censor cuts. And Australia didn't make any censor cuts to their copies. And New Zealand made 2 censor cuts to episode 4. So we've no idea where this set of prints came from. Now, interestingly, in the 1970s, at some point, another copy of at least episode 2 made its way into the wild, and that turned up in 1983. So you would think that one of the copies that we have is the New Zealand-Singapore copy, and the other copy is the Australia copy, whichever way round that is. So it sounds ostensibly like all copies could be accounted for and could be in the UK. However, what we don't know is how many copies Australia had, and there's evidence, albeit anecdotal at the moment, that Australia made multiple strikings of prints because they needed to broadcast them in geographically distant regions within a tight time scale. So what I'd like to know is whether the episode 1, 2, and 3 that exist have splices in them, because the copies of Enemy and Web that were found in Nigeria in 2011 had splices in them because they went through Singapore, which was the commercial station. So it'd be interesting to know whether the copies that are in the archive have splices in there in the fades to black, because they would have adverts in there which would indicate that they're the Singapore copies. So just before I get to my point, there's a reasonable chance, I guess, that there is at least one copy of the 10th Planet episode 4 in the hands of film collectors, because we knew that a copy of episode 2 was in the hands of a film collector. So that's quite hopeful, albeit in the context that we haven't had a missing episode returned in over 10 years. The summary of that is it didn't sell very widely, and there weren't many copies about, but it's possible there's one in private hands. However, back in 2013, there was a large rumour, and the main key, most intriguing point of this was that the 10th Planet and Power of the Daleks was found in an African country which didn't pay for them. And we're going to cover that next time in the Power of the Daleks. So there is an interesting argument, interesting analysis of what the various players say about this and whether this is possible, and we'll cover that next time. So there we are.
And that concludes our look at the 10th Planet. If you've enjoyed this, please do find the time to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. 5-star written reviews make more of an impact than listens in terms of propelling our way up the charts, which will help people find us. Our executive producers are Bedwyr Gullidge and Rich Tipple. Both are splendid champions of this podcast, and their support is hugely appreciated. Thank you very much, both. Also, again, to the brilliant producer and artist for hire, B. Garrido, thank you so much. B provides the cover artwork. She does amazing Doctor Who portraits, so please check them out at bgarridoart.weebly.com. If you'd like to help me cover our costs and to keep me in crumpets, head to www.patreon.com/missingepisodes, where you get early access. The patrons have had this for a month, and some other treats. For instance, there's an exclusive William Hartnell era retrospective video chat with John Kelly and Jim Trenowden. There's lots of exclusive content there now for you to go and enjoy. Middle tier Mighty Kublai Khan patrons have a monthly Missing Episodes chinwag with yours truly. Speaking of whom, thanks to all our patrons whose generous support is so appreciated, and especially Andy Kitching, Anthony Carroll, Tony Carroll, Anthony Weiner, Chris Phone, David Matthewman, Dean Poole, Gary Gillett, Harry Townsend, Jack Sharp, Jess Jerkovic, Jim Trenowden, Matthew, Paul Cook, Phil Mitchell, Piers Carrig, Ray Badrick, Sarah Irving, Simon Exton, Simon Whitehead, Sinead Morse, and the mighty Tim Harding. If Patreon isn't for you, you can leave me a tip at Ko-fi, that's ko-fi.com/missingeps. Also, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have a Facebook page, and I can be found on Twitter at Doctor Who Podcasters, and that's with a DR. Anyway, David and Greg, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. That's been terrific. And that's it. Until next time.